Hey everyone, what's going on? Jeff here from Films at Home, and today I've got another 4K review to do for you. We're taking a look at a catalog title here from Paramount, which was just recently released. It is Almost Famous on 4K Ultra HD. Now, this movie is kind of interesting. I'll talk about the different versions of this release that are coming out and why there's a little bit of a weird decision you have to make when buying this movie, but also talk about some strange things that happened during this review and cover video, audio, and special features and packaging as always. So jumping right into the visuals on Almost Famous, this was shot on 35mm, and Paramount did a brand new 4K restoration here from that 35mm negative, and they did it on both the theatrical and the bootleg cut, each of which gets its own 4K disc here. Now, Dolby Vision HDR is also included, as well as an HDR10 base. So you have a couple options. Now, I obviously watched it in Dolby Vision whenever that's available. I try to watch it that way. And I didn't think that the colors in this were overwhelmingly great. That HDR really added a whole lot. I've seen some releases where highlights and contrast was a little bit better. This wasn't one of my favorite 4K releases ever. I was comparing it to the Blu-ray, which I also owned. And yeah, there's some slight noticeable differences here and there, but you have to remember that this movie's color palette is very much like this steelbook. It's very brown, sepia tone, some burgundy, some light brownish reds. It's not a very colorful movie. Everything is it has that 70s vibe to it. Yellows, browns, reds, nothing too over the top. You get your occasional highlight moment here and there, but other than that, it's a pretty standard color scheme, so the HDR really didn't add a whole lot. I think the big reason to upgrade, if you choose to, is really the new 4K restoration and the way that they've handled the grain structure, detail quality, all that great stuff that you get on 4K, which is sometimes overlooked because of the HDR. But in the case of Almost Famous, you definitely see a lot more detail come out in this picture, in this 4K restoration. The grain structure is handled very well. It is pretty consistent across the picture as well, which is something I did like. Sometimes that comes down to how consistent the source is as well. But you'd see that even on close-up shots or shots that are a little bit further away, you didn't really get a whole lot of variation in the grain. It's a very, very consistent grain structure. And both the theatrical and the bootleg cut, to me, look indistinguishable. I really didn't see a difference. It definitely looks like they used the same exact 4K master in the same process, which totally makes sense. Why would you differentiate the two? But I think they're pretty much the same. There may have been a couple differences maybe in a scene that was on the bootleg cut that's not on theatrical, that maybe went through a little bit less post-production way back when, or the archive of what was left over wasn't as good. Like, you might have slight variations there, but the overall color scheme and the overall HDR color grading, the grain structure, most of this is very consistent against both cuts. And while the HDR wasn't overwhelming, I do think they did a very nice job with this film transfer, and it's certainly the best that it's ever looked. Now, on the audio for this release, unfortunately, there isn't an upgrade there. We're getting the same DTS HD Master Audio 5.1 track, which was available on the previous Blu-ray. Yeah, I would have loved to see them play with Atmos, or maybe, a Dolby True HD, something like that would have been nice. But it's not really needed, because this soundtrack is, again, outside of the music, the audio on this and the soundtrack is basically dialogue driven. There aren't a huge ton of effects. The biggest, special effects scene is probably on the plane. That certainly has some audio highlight moments, but the big audio highlights are from the music, and the music sounds great in 5.1. The bass is especially impressive. I could really feel that, especially in the concert scenes, and the soundtrack to this movie is excellent. So overall, there was only one scene where I had any sort of an issue. Dialogue got like really loud. It kind of peaked for like a half a second. I noticed that, but otherwise, very, very consistent release with the audio. No complaints there. It could have been nice to see what an Atmos or more advanced track could have done to this. But again, you have to think about source. You have to think about it costs like $200,000 to add an Atmos track. And so if you're happy with the 5.1 that exists, especially as a director and filmmaker, there's really not a whole lot of reason to upgrade sometimes, and so I can see why they stuck with what they had. Now, before we jump into packaging and features, I do have to note something here, and this was a concern that actually somebody on Instagram had brought up to me, and I paid close attention throughout the movie looking for, and unfortunately, it affected me probably even worse than it affected the person who notified me. But the theatrical cut seems to be having some issues right in between about the 50-minute to 70-minute mark, somewhere in right around 1 hour into the movie. This disc had an issue for me, had an issue for another person as well. You know, I'd have to gather some more data, but it looks like we may have a disc mastering issue or something going on here. For me, what happened was it completely froze at the 51-minute mark. Everything froze on my screen. It started skipping and then froze. I couldn't skip chapters. I couldn't fast forward, rewind. I had to restart the disc. Then I restarted the disc, went back to that same point, and I got to about 70 minutes and it froze again and completely died. Had to restart the disc again, was checking my player. There was nothing wrong with any of the equipment. I've never had this issue before. When I put the disc back in after the 70-minute mark, it ran for the rest of the movie, no issues at all. And up to that point, it didn't have any issues at all. But I think right in the middle of the movie, there's something going on with this disc, because the person who alerted me also had an issue around the 70-minute mark where their whole screen pixelated and froze on them, and they also had to restart their disc. So, you know, those are two completely different discs. It wasn't a friend, it wasn't somebody, you know, it was just somebody online who happened to get a copy early as well. So it seems like there might be a disc mastering issue. I reached out to Paramount, their team is looking into it. They'll definitely correct this if there's an issue. I know them well enough that I know they'll issue replacement discs if they have to. But that is a little concerning. So when you guys get yours, definitely be interested to hear maybe how widespread this issue is. But I have to note that when doing this review, that it had some major hiccups in the middle. So now packaging right here, I've got the 4K Steelbook. So you've got Kate Hudson, Penny Lane on the front. You got some artwork on the back, the spine. And then, like I said, you've got double discs here. So some artwork here of Stillwater, the band, and then you've got the theatrical cut and the bootleg cut. So both get their own 4K disc. The theatrical disc has special features on it, and the bootleg cut has some special features as well. You do get a digital code as well, but it should be noted there is no Blu-ray copy here. All the special features are on the 4K disc, and there's no additional Blu-ray. Now, the reason I said there's interesting release kind of stuff going on with this is because while we're getting a 4K Steelbook, we're also getting a Paramount Presents release, which is the Blu-ray version of this 4K master from the Paramount Presents line. Now, I don't have that here. Obviously, I opted for the 4K. Always want to review the highest quality stuff I can. But it is sort of an interesting thing. I don't know why Paramount decided for this one to do a 4K disc and Paramount Presents, and on other movies they've only done Paramount Presents or only done a 4K disc. Didn't really have any clarity on that. I think maybe it comes down to the stature of the movie, of which this is clearly, you know, a pretty well-liked movie by many. Maybe they thought the sales would be good enough to do both, but just an interesting thing. But you do have that option. If you don't want the 4K disc, you can still get this new 4K master downscaled to 1080p on Blu-ray. So overall, I would say this is kind of a middle of the pack 4K disc. You know, the movie's not going to benefit from HDR. The audio track wasn't upgraded. Still great, but not an upgrade. Steelbook packaging is nice, and the visual quality and the detail is certainly, you know, a nice leap over what was there on Blu-ray before. So it's certainly, you know, an upgrade from what you have. But the disc mastering issues in the middle, that definitely puts a little bit of a damper on this release. You hate to see that happen. You know, overall, it's kind of middle of the pack. It's worth an upgrade for the hardcore fans out there. But I think that the Paramount Presents Blu-ray could be a decent option for some people who are looking to save a little bit of money and not spend on the 4K. And, you know, if you've never bought the movie before and you haven't necessarily upgraded to 4K, that Paramount Presents is still probably going to be a pretty good release based on the transfer here. If you are a true 4K fan and you want the best experience, this is it. This is as good as you can get right now on 4K. Like, you can't beat this disc. But that being said, it's not one of the larger upgrades that I've ever seen. So it would kind of come down to you, your budget, and making your own decision, which ultimately you should do anyway. So thanks for watching this review. I will leave a link to this down in the description, although you may want to be careful with pre-orders until maybe we hear some more news from Paramount. I'll be sure to keep everybody updated on the channel in my community tab and on social media like Instagram once I hear more. But if you want to order it, links are down in the description, both for the Steelbook and for Paramount Presents. So you have both options there. And I really appreciate y'all watching this 4K review. This movie's a lot of fun. This is actually the first time I'd seen it. I hadn't seen the theatrical cut before. Great rock and roll movie. I had a ton of fun with it. Really, really well done. Can't believe I hadn't seen it up to this point. So I recommend it as a movie, but I would say tread carefully with this 4K disc and don't expect too much. If your expectations are sort of middle of the pack, I think you'll enjoy it. So thanks for watching. Make sure you follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. All the links are in the description, as well as links to help support my channel and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you like the video so others will see it and we spread the word about physical media. You guys are helping get more physical media releases out there every time you like a video and subscribe to this channel, because it gives the community even more power. So I appreciate that, especially as somebody who loves physical media. But yeah, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and stay healthy out there, and I will talk to you soon.